Thank you guys for tuning in today and welcome to another episode of The Source. I'm your host Zan Raza and we are continuing our conversation with author, activist and philosopher Srećko Horvat. Srećko, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me again.
Let us pick up where we left off of the corona crisis. I want to particularly talk about the psychology of the individual within the framework of this crisis. We're seeing people falling into a personal hole. They're falling off the hamster wheel. They were waking up, going to work. Everything was in order, going to university and stuff. And what I am noticing through my observation is that people who were so focused on the material self, like I need a job, I need a car, I need a new apartment, and who put very little focus on the development of the self, in my opinion, are now falling in all sorts of holes. They're now forced to rediscover themselves. You, on the other hand, have been a creative thinking philosopher, and you have been doing journalism and activism and have been for this perhaps is not so difficult as it would be for people who have just never thought about the system. What could you share from your personal experience and what advice could you give people who are now confronted with this?
Yeah, it sounds better when you say it, but it's not true. I think we are all in deep shit at the moment. Some are deeper, some are not. To be honest, I'm happy enough to be in self-isolation for 2 weeks already. But when I say happy enough, I'm usually happy to isolate myself, but I'm not happy when I'm forced to isolate. And this is an enforced self-isolation, I would say, in order to protect the others. It's not so much about myself, but not to accelerate the current spread of the coronavirus. But when I say I'm happy enough, it means that I'm happy enough that I have a roof above my head, that I have internet, that I can talk to you, that I can still act and organize. For me, this is not such a big change in the sense that I always spend time at home reading, doing, unfortunately, too many video conferences for organizing and so on. The biggest difference for myself is that I don't travel at the moment. I don't give lectures. Some of my books are postponed. I mean, all this, as I said, sounds like some luxury, but I don't have the income I had before. Definitely not. So I'm just using my savings, but I'm lucky enough to have some savings. But I'm just telling you this to understand my personal situation, which, as said, is not so bad compared to many other people, because you can see that those who are affected most by this crisis, as with any other crisis, are the homeless people, is the working class, those who still have to work, who are not lucky enough to be in self-isolation or have any savings, and the most vulnerable groups of society and also parts of the world. What will happen when this really hits Brazil or some African country if the European Union itself is already on its knees, by handling the crisis. You've seen what's happening in Italy. Spain the other day had a bigger death toll than China. So the situation is rather bad. What this brings on the emotional level, on the personal level, I think is a tremendous change, which doesn't necessarily have to be bad. But the bad side of it is that people are already for weeks, somewhere for months, in China or South Korea, living in a constant fear, in a constant situation of what they call now social distancing, which is a completely wrong term, I think. It should be physical distancing, and we need more social contacts than ever, like this one, especially in a situation of self-isolation. And I think, you mentioned this, I think it is definitely easier for those people who already have some social bonds, that they can now reactivate the social bonds. They can communicate to people, share, what's happening in Croatia, what's happening in Germany. Did you see what happened in UK and so on? And also this kind of, which might sound naive, but I feel this kind of comparative analysis actually helps you also in something which might be emancipatory potential. In what sense? In the sense that now you can see how which government or society handled the crisis. You can even see that in some countries there is nationalization going on, whether it's hospitals or railways. Of course, it's not the same nationalizations as some would wish for, but it's still some step which would have been unimaginable a few weeks ago. Or you can see that even universal basic income suddenly becomes possible, that even radically cutting carbon emissions is possible, or air pollution. All these images from the satellite we have seen in China, New York, Italy, you can see that the world is already changing. So these are not bad outcomes of the coronavirus crisis. And I think, the very fact that at this moment, I think it's 2 billion people confined in some sort of quarantine, self-isolation, or isolation. This fact that around 2 billion people in the world are thinking about the same time when they go to, about the same thing when they go to sleep and when they wake up, and during the whole day, although this creates a kind of global psychosis, at the same time, it also opens a global planetary possibility, I would say, because now we are all in the same boat, although that's also not completely true. When Elon Musk or these rich people and so on say, we are now all the same, we could all, he didn't say it, he called it the dump virus, I think, or something like that. But when the other rich people say, we are in the same boat, it's a democratic virus, that's not really true, because you see who are the people who are dying most, and who are the ones who can get tested. You even show the stories of rich kids flying private jet to China to get a test. So it's not that we're all the same, and we are not affected in the same way. But at the same time, I think, yes, there is a kind of global awareness, planetary awareness rising. For the first time, also those things which we progressives were advocating, a Green New Deal, massive state investment into green technologies, health, free and public health care, free education and universities. Suddenly this is happening to a certain degree, but suddenly people will realize, this is possible, although the leaders were telling us this is completely impossible.
What do you hold about the clash between two ideologies? I want to get your take on this. Liberalism is clashing with socialism at the moment. There's this one side of the argument that's saying our personal liberties are being taken away. See the drastic measures of the governments that are being enforced by the police and draconian laws, and this is just a taste of power for governments. On the other hand, socialists are arguing that we need to have these drastic measures to make sure that this virus doesn't spread to older people, to people who have medical conditions. What do you think should be the progressive stance? There's a truth in both elements, in my opinion, because we know that governments have misused when they've realized a taste of power. We saw that, for example, in post 9/11, after that happened, what kind of measures were implemented, and they've never been taken away. Instead, they've been expanded on. On the other side, there's a truth about public health that we need to take care. What is your stance as a philosopher and progressive person, that what is the best way to approach this clash?
Yeah, it's really a contradictory situation. It's a complex situation. There is no easy way out of this contradiction, I would say. Anyone who claims it is naive or not thinking it deep enough. Because I think, at this moment, or to put it simple, one of my good friends reacted in this way to this question. He said, as a Marxist, I'm happy to see, the role of the state is rising again, and you have nationalization of railways, you have state investment and so on. But as an anarchist, I'm very worried. And I think this is also a problem for liberalism, the theory of liberalism, which is based on civil liberties. But at the same time, liberals now are forced to advocate the role of the state, which is then imposing control and trying to contain the spread of a virus. So, and there is also another contradiction which you saw these days. It's a very sad one and tragic one, which you saw these days in Zagreb, when Zagreb was already in quarantine, and an earthquake higher than 5.3 Richter scale hit Zagreb, the strongest earthquake in the last 140 years. And you had a situation where the authorities, the government was telling people for days and days, stay at home, stay at home, stay at home, social distancing and so on. And then suddenly at 6 o'clock in the morning, an earthquake hits and people escape out. And the government is giving a new information, request how to behave, and they say, yes, go out of your home, but keep social distancing. And the beautiful images from Zagreb and also the stories, I'm not in Croatia, unfortunately, at the moment. What my friends and family told me is that when people escaped their homes and gathered on the squares, they were really keeping social distance in that moment, which shows something about the resilience, although I hated that term, the resilience of people. And in the same way, you have this kind of contradictory threat, stay at home, go out, stay at home, go out. I think you have this kind of similar contradiction also on the level of the state and the role of the state. Because obviously in this kind of situation, even me personally would advocate, that scientists have this under control and that they give us input how to behave, how to do social distancing, whether to have a mask or not to have a mask, how long to stay at home, and so on. And it is a good thing. I still think with all this fake news that scientists, doctors, and so on are now more in the media, and people are trusting them actually more than the politicians. You even had it in Latin America with some narco cartels who are self-organizing because they have stupid governments. And they are now providing, not saying anything well or good about narco cartels, but this act just shows how bad some governments are. But so you can see that I think the trust in science is rising. I hope I'm not wrong. But at the same time, you can see that all of us who tried for years to change the system in one way or the other, or proposing progressive policies on technology, democracy, finance, economy, and so on, that we are faced with a complex situation where this situation is now leading, on the one hand, to state investment, which is still not enough, if you ask me, and also different institutions like the European Central Bank and so on could be used in much better ways than the current plan by the European Commission. And on the other side, you can also see how countries such as Hungary, for instance, Viktor Orban and so on, are actually using the situation to fulfill all their dystopian dreams. Not only a curfew, not only army on the streets, not only state of exception, but now also ruling by decree until the end of the year, imprisoning people and so on. So it's a very complex situation, and I think our role is more important than ever.
Srećko Horvat, author and activist, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me again, and all the best with your program.
And thank you guys for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to donate so we can continue to produce independent and non-profit news and analysis. I'm your host, Sad Raza. See you guys next time.